The night Drew Emery chose to remind Chicago who he was, he forgot entirely who had helped him become that person. The Marquette Grand had been booked out for 6 months for his Legacy Foundation Gala. 6 months of florists arguing over centerpieces, of PR firms crafting the guest list like a military strategy, of Melissa Rand, his fiancée, his upgrade, his living proof that he had moved on and moved up, approving every detail from the shade of the tablecloths to the font on the programs. The event was billed as a charity gala, technically, but everyone who received an invitation understood that the charity was secondary. The evening was about Drew. It had always been about Drew. He stood near the entrance of the grand ballroom as the first guests arrived, dressed in a tuxedo that fit like a second skin. His smile rehearsed down to the wattage. Around him, the room was a production. Crystal chandeliers casting gold light across a hall full of Chicago's architects, investors, developers, and the politicians who needed all three. A string quartet played something elegant in the corner. Waitstaff circled with trays of champagne and bruschetta. Every surface gleamed. "She coming?" one of his groomsmen asked, lowering his voice. Drew smiled. "She'll come." He had sent the invitation personally. Had written Celia Tanner's name by hand on the envelope, which he knew was a detail that would unsettle her. That he still remembered her handwriting habits, her preference for formal mail over email, all the small things that once made her feel known. The invitation was not an olive branch. It was a taunt dressed in cream-colored cardstock. He wanted her to walk into this room and understand in a single glance exactly how thoroughly he had eclipsed her. Melissa appeared at his elbow, her gown a deep burgundy, her diamond earrings catching the light. She was 29 and photogenic in a way that cameras loved and other women studied. She leaned close. "Any sign of her?" "Not yet," Drew said. "But she'll be here. She can't help herself." Melissa smiled the way she always smiled when the subject of Celia came up, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had already won and just wanted to watch the other person figure it out. "I want to be nearby when she walks in. I want to see her face when she sees all of this." What neither of them knew, what Drew could not have known, because he had stopped paying attention to anyone who wasn't useful to him, was that 3 months earlier, the Chicago Department of Urban Planning had awarded the Waterfront Regeneration Project to Tanner and Associates, a $40 million contract, the largest urban landscape commission in the city's last decade. The same contract Drew's firm had spent 14 months and over $250,000 pursuing. He had called losing it a temporary setback at his last investor meeting. His investors had nodded politely and written notes they did not share with him. He had sent Celia the invitation 2 weeks after that announcement. He either hadn't put it together, or he had, and was too proud to admit what it meant. Celia Tanner was not the type to talk about the worst years of her life in mixed company. Not because she was ashamed of them, but because she had lived them once already and had no interest in performing them for an audience. But on the drive to the Marquette that evening, something in the city, the way the lakefront caught the last of the light, the way Chicago looked like it was made of glass and intention, made the past rise up quietly, the way old things do when you're finally far enough from them to look. She had been 29 when she married Drew. Young enough to believe that someone else's confidence could substitute for your own, that a man who spoke about the future like he owned it was worth following into it. She had given him 7 years. She had given him, more specifically, $200,000. Her grandmother's estate left to her with the instruction to build something that lasts. She had believed she was doing exactly that. She spent the first year of their marriage quietly submerging her own small practice. The boutique landscape architecture firm she had built from a home office and a borrowed truck, into his vision for a real estate development company. She managed the design division. She brought in her contacts, her contracts, her credibility with the city's urban planning offices. She told herself it was a partnership. She told herself that what was his was hers, and what was hers was his, because they were married, and that was how it worked. She found out how it worked when she told him she was pregnant. He didn't leave immediately. That wasn't Drew's style. He was a man who built his exits carefully, who treated every relationship like a negotiation. He began working later, traveling more. He brought Melissa to a firm event before the divorce was filed. introduced her as an investor relations consultant, and half the room had already figured out what Celia hadn't let herself see. When he finally sat her down 3 months into her pregnancy, he spoke about the marriage the way he spoke about underperforming properties, with regret, with efficiency, and with a settlement offer already drafted. The settlement gave her the furniture, a car, and a monthly payment that covered daycare and not much else. The firm, her contacts, her designs, her grandmother's money, was his. His lawyers had made sure of it before he ever sat down at that table. She had been too exhausted to fight. She had a newborn coming and nowhere to go, and she had spent so long building Drew's version of the future that she had nearly forgotten she knew how to build her own. The years that followed were the kind that don't make good stories because they're too specific and too long. They involved a lot of coffee that went cold, a lot of freelance proposals that came back declined, a lot of mornings when her daughter Ava woke up at 5 and needed things, breakfast, comfort, presents. And Celia gave all of them while still wearing yesterday's exhaustion like a second shirt. She took residential jobs. She redesigned backyard gardens for families in Oak Park. She drafted patio plans for restaurants on the north side. Small work, patient work. The kind of work you do when you're building something slowly enough that no one notices until it's already built. The rumor that Drew had spread, that she'd left the firm due to creative differences, a phrase that managed to sound mutual while assigning her the blame, followed her for 2 years. She lost a city contract she had earned because someone on the selection committee had heard it from someone who had heard it from Drew's circle. She had swallowed that, too. What she had not done was stop, not once. 18 months ago, she had presented at an urban planning conference in the West Loop. The session was poorly attended, a Tuesday afternoon slot, up against a panel on tax incentives. And she had given her presentation on sustainable waterfront design to a room of about 30 people, most of whom were checking their phones. One of them was not. Caleb Norris had come to the conference without his assistant, which was unusual enough that people had noticed. He was 51, with the kind of calm that came from having made and lost enough money to stop treating it like a personality. He had built 3 of the buildings visible from the conference window. He listened to Celia's entire presentation without moving. Afterward, he waited until the room had cleared and then asked if she had time for a conversation. She had been suspicious. She had learned to be. Men in good suits who approached her after professional events rarely had purely professional intentions, and she had stopped giving the benefit of the doubt somewhere around year 2 of rebuilding. But Caleb Norris was direct in a way that left no room for misreading. He told her he had just lost a key partner on the waterfront bid. He told her that her approach to sustainable waterfront design was exactly what the city's selection committee had said they were looking for in their public briefing. He told her he would rather lose the contract with the right partner than win it with the wrong one. She asked him why he should trust her. He said, "I read your work, all of it, including the designs filed under the Emery Group before 2019. Which are clearly your hand and not his." He paused. "I've also read every proposal your former firm submitted for this contract. They're competent. Yours would be better." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said yes. Tanner and Associates was formally incorporated 4 months later. The waterfront proposal took 11 months of work, 3 all-nighters, and 1 presentation so precise that 2 members of the selection committee had started clapping before she finished speaking. The contract was awarded on a Wednesday, she cried in her car, and then picked up Ava from school and took her for ice cream without explaining why. Drew's firm came in third. The limousine was Caleb's idea. Celia pushed back on it. She didn't need the statement, she said. She just needed to show up. And he looked at her with the measured patience of someone who understood optics better than she wanted to admit. "You're not showing up," he said. "You're arriving. There's a difference." And Drew Emery built his entire career on understanding it. She couldn't argue with that. Ava was with her grandmother most evenings, but tonight her mother had brought her to the hotel early. The Marquette had a children's charity component on the same floor, an arts fundraiser in an adjacent room, and the plan was for Ava to find her mother later, once the event was underway. Celia had dressed her in a deep green velvet dress, that matched her own emerald gown, mostly because Ava had insisted, and she had learned not to fight her daughter on things that mattered in the way only 7-year-olds understand. The car pulled up at 8:15, late enough to be noticed, not so late as to seem calculated. Celia stepped out onto the red carpet that Drew had laid for his own arrival. Caleb stepped out behind her. The photographers clustered at the entrance. Drew had hired a small media team for the event. Started repositioning almost immediately, the way photographers do when something more interesting than what they were expecting walks into the frame. She wore her hair down, which she almost never did. The emerald gown was floor length, structured at the shoulder, simple in the way that only expensive things manage to be simple. The diamond pendant at her throat was the one her grandmother had worn to her own wedding. Celia had sold it once, briefly, to cover Ava's first year of daycare. Her mother had quietly bought it back and returned it without making either of them say anything about it. She walked into the Marquette Grand with her chin level, and her pulse high and her face betraying neither of those things. The room noticed. The way a room notices when something has arrived that it wasn't prepared for. She saw Drew before he saw her. He was standing near the bar, glass in hand, surrounded by 3 men she recognized as investors from his early years. He was laughing. He looked like a man who had written his own story and liked every chapter. Then he turned. The laugh didn't disappear exactly. It dissolved, slowly, the way a sound does when the room it was filling suddenly changes shape. Melissa saw her a moment later and went very still. Celia kept walking. Caleb stayed at her side without crowding her, which was a thing she had noticed about him from the beginning. That he understood how to be present without taking up space that wasn't his. The guests near the entrance began to recognize him first, and then to register who was beside him, and then to do the arithmetic that produced the collective quiet that followed them across the marble floor. She heard her name twice before Drew reached her. Celia. He said it the way he said her name in the old days, with a casual authority that assumed she would orient toward him. I didn't know if you'd actually come. I almost didn't, she said, but I thought it would be good for Ava to see this. Ava? He glanced around. You brought her here? She's in the charity room with the other children? Celia smiled, and it was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes because it doesn't need to. She likes events. Takes after her father that way, I suppose. Drew's jaw shifted. He pulled himself back into the rehearsed version of himself. Well, you look. He gestured vaguely, a condescension disguised as a compliment. You've managed to pull it together, I'll say that. Still doing the residential work? The backyard jobs? Among other things, she said. He let the silence sit for a beat, then looked at Caleb. And you brought a date? Or is this a business thing? He said it with the tone of a man who already knows the answer and finds it diminishing. Caleb extended his hand, unhurried. Caleb Norris, I'm her business partner. Drew shook it without enthusiasm. I know who you are. Then you know we signed the waterfront contract in February, Caleb said. I believe your firm was in the running. You came in third, if I'm remembering correctly. Something moved across Drew's face. Too fast to be named, but not fast enough to hide. Around them, 4 or 5 nearby guests had gone quiet in the particular way people go quiet when they sense they're about to see something worth watching. Drew laughed, short, dismissive. 3rd out of 32 firms. Competitive bid. It was, Caleb agreed. Celia's design won it. It was not a speech she had prepared. She had told herself she wouldn't make one. But when Drew turned back to her, when he dropped the pretense of pleasantry, and said, with the particular edge he had always kept sharpened for her specifically, I hope you've put your grandmother's money to better use this time. Something in her simply opened. She spoke to him, but she spoke to the room. You told people I left the firm due to creative differences, she said. That's the version of things you've been repeating for 5 years. I'd like to give you the actual version. He started to say something. She didn't let him. I put $200,000 of my grandmother's estate into your first project. I brought you your first 4 clients because they were my contacts from 7 years of work I'd done before I ever met you. The design philosophy your firm pitches to every city contract committee. The language about ecological integration and community-centered development. I wrote that. You have it in the marketing materials you still use. She paused. I'm not angry about those years anymore. I want to be clear about that. I'm not here for a fight. I'm here because you sent me an invitation, and I decided that 5 years was long enough to be someone you got to define. The room was very quiet. A woman near the back, she would find out later, it was an investor named Patricia Gould, who had been one of Celia's early clients, who had moved her account to the Emery Group after the divorce, made a sound that was almost a word. She's right, Patricia Gould said, clearly enough that people turned. She designed the Fenwick Courtyard project. I commissioned her directly. I was told when I renewed with the Emery Group that she had stepped back from design work. She looked at Drew. You told me that yourself. Drew's smile was gone entirely. Melissa was watching from across the room. Her face had the expression of someone reading the final pages of a book they had bought, expecting a different ending. She had spent 3 years building a life around Drew's version of success, and she was fast enough, with numbers and consequences, to understand what she was watching. She had signed a prenuptial agreement. She had signed it because a lawyer she trusted had told her it was a formality, that the firm was worth what Drew said it was worth. She thought about the waterfront contract loss Drew had called a minor setback. She thought about the debt restructuring conversations she had overheard through closed doors. She thought about what 3rd out of 32 sounded like to the men who funded his next project. She crossed the room. She stopped at his side. She took the ring off in one clean motion, the way you'd remove something that was never really yours. She set it in his palm. I'm not doing this, she said, quietly but not quietly enough. I'm not standing here. And she walked. Through the parting guests, through the murmurs, past the photographers who swung their cameras from the stage to her, through the lobby, and out into the Chicago night. Drew stood with the ring in his hand, and the room staring at him, and no version of himself left to perform. Ava found her mother by the ballroom entrance 20 minutes later. Her velvet dress had a small chocolate stain near the hem, which she displayed with the pride of someone who had been having an excellent evening. She looked at the room, at Caleb, at her mother's face. You okay? She asked. She was 7, and she already asked that question, with the directness of someone who had learned that it mattered. Celia crouched down to her level and straightened the small bow at the back of her dress. Yeah, baby, I'm okay. That man over there keeps looking at you. Ava tilted her head toward the bar, where Drew stood in a cluster of people who were all subtly positioned with their backs to him. I know. He looks sad. He is. Ava considered this with the gravity 7-year-olds bring to information they're still processing. Because of what happened? Because of what he did, Celia said, a long time ago. And because he thought tonight was going to feel different than it does. Ava nodded slowly. Then is Caleb coming to dinner after? Celia looked up at Caleb, who had been standing a respectful distance away, and who smiled at her now with the kind of quiet that contained more than it needed to say. If he wants to, she said. I want to, he said. Outside, the Chicago skyline held still above the lake. The April air was cold in the way that Chicago April air always is. Not winter anymore, but not quite willing to let you forget that it was. Celia stood on the hotel steps while the valet brought the car around and let herself feel the full weight of the evening, which was lighter than she expected. Caleb stood beside her without filling the silence. That was one of the first things she had noticed about him in that half-empty conference room 18 months ago. The way he listened like he had time, like her words deserved the space to land before he responded. You didn't have to do that in there, she said. The waterfront comment. You didn't owe me that. I know, he said. You made him look small in front of his investors. He made himself look small, I just provided some context. She almost laughed. That's a generous interpretation. He turned to her. The first time I saw your work, the actual work, not the version of it that got filed under someone else's name, I understood what kind of mind made those decisions. Every choice had a reason. Every detail was in conversation with every other detail. He paused. I've worked with a lot of architects. Very few of them build like someone who thinks about what the space will feel like in 30 years. You do. She had received compliments before. They had never felt quite like this. Not like flattery, but like being accurately seen, which was something different entirely. 6 weeks from now, he said, they'll break ground on the waterfront. Your name is on the cornerstone proposal. I know, she said. And none of this. He nodded back toward the hotel, toward Drew's Gala, toward all the rooms she had been told she didn't belong in. None of it slows that down. She looked at the lake, at the lights on the water, at the city she had redesigned in her head 100 times during the years when she couldn't afford to actually redesign anything. My grandmother used to say that the things you build with your own hands are the only things that belong to you, she said. I think she meant furniture, but I've been applying it more broadly. Caleb smiled. I think she had it right. The car arrived. Ava climbed in first, already negotiating about where they were going for dinner. Celia followed, and then Caleb, and the door closed behind them. Drew Emery's Legacy Foundation Gala generated $312,000 in charitable donations. It also generated a call from his lead investor the following Monday, asking for a meeting about the creative origins of the firm's design portfolio. That meeting led to 2 more meetings, an audit and a conversation with an attorney that Drew would later describe as the worst hour of his professional life. His firm filed for bankruptcy protection 8 weeks after the gala. Melissa gave an interview to a lifestyle publication 4 months later, describing herself as someone who had to learn the hard way that a man's confidence and a man's character are not the same thing. She came across well in the piece. People have short memories and long sympathies, and she used both wisely. Celia did not give any interviews. She was too busy. The waterfront project broke ground on a Thursday morning in May, with the mayor present and a crowd of city planners and architecture students who had followed the commission since the announcement. Tanner and Associates had a table near the front. Caleb stood to Celia's left. Ava stood to her right, holding a small paper flag she had made herself with a green crayon, because she had decided that green was the official color of her mother's company, and that someone needed to represent it properly. The cornerstone bore a plaque, Tanner and Associates lead designer, Chicago Waterfront Regeneration Project. Celia's name, her work, her vision for what the waterfront could look and feel like in 30 years. For the children who would play on it, the families who would sit beside it, the city that would grow around it. She looked at it for a long time. Ava slipped her hand into hers. Mommy, is your name on that? It is, she said. Is it going to stay there? She thought about all the years she had spent answering that question in different forms. Whether her name would stay. Whether her work would remain hers. Whether the things she built with her own hands could be taken from her by someone who was louder and more certain of himself than she was. Yeah, baby, she said. It's going to stay. The sun came off the lake the way it does on clear Chicago mornings, hard and honest and without apology. Celia stood in it and let it find her. She was not the woman Drew had tried to diminish. She had never been. She was the woman he had never taken the time to understand, and that had been, in the end, entirely his loss.